All right. I want to welcome all of you to our informational webinar. Today's presentation is just going to be me presenting at you for a good chunk of the time, but feel free to post any questions along the way in the chat area. So yeah, I want to welcome you. Today is September 11th, 2019. I'm Janet Warburton. I'm the principal investigator for PolarTREC, and Judy Fonstock is with me behind the PolarTREC logo. Oh, there she is. And today we're both going to be sharing information about the PolarTREC program, and I'm assuming that you've all joined us because you're eager to apply to our program, which we just announced. If you didn't get the announcement, the application period opened up yesterday. I think it was yesterday. Maybe it was Monday. I'm losing track of time. But whatever day it was, it just opened up recently. So make sure you go to the website and get all the information there on how to apply, whether you're an educator or a researcher. And thank you to those of you that are introducing yourselves in the chat area. It's great to see where you're all coming from. So this presentation, oops, there we go. Get rid of the chat box. So during the presentation, again, please type your questions in the chat area, and at the end of the presentation, you can just open up your mics and ask your question live, and that's kind of how we'll do things for the event. This event is being archived, and so the recording, it usually takes us 1 to 2 days to process the recording and post it online, and it will be also sent out to everyone that registered through email how to access that link. So for today's presentation, it's really about a lot of information that's on the web already. So you can go there and read in more details. But today we'll talk a little bit about our organization, ARCIS, more about the program that ARCIS runs called PolarTREC, what our goals are and program needs are, how data is shown that it benefits educators and researchers. A lot of time is spent really on the actual application process, and specifically more for the educators that are applying than for the researchers, but we'll talk to everybody about that process. We also go into what happens if you are selected for PolarTREC, what happens if you aren't, and then answer any of your questions. So that's what we're going to cover here, hopefully in the next half an hour to an hour. I'll just kind of see it. It usually depends on the questions. So some backup here about ARCIS and who we are. We're a nonprofit, and we are based in around the United States. Most of our employees are telecommute from our various places. Judy's in New Hampshire. I'm located in normally in Anchorage, Alaska. I'm not there right at the moment, but that's where I normally live. And we do have a small office based in Fairbanks, Alaska, that has some business and RT people. Our whole organization is to provide support for researchers that work in the polar regions and to help them get their science out to the public and help them better engage with people that live in the Arctic, people, educators, the public, professionals, policymakers, anyone that does work in the Arctic. So you can read more about ARCIS at arcis.org. How does PolarTREC fit into that? Well, it is a NSF-funded program. We applied for funding initially in 2004 and have subsequently gotten funding every year to put educators with researchers in polar field research situations. Typically, the research experiences for the educator range from anywhere to 3 to 6 weeks, just depending on the location and the nature of the science. A recent development to our program has been the inclusion of informal science educators. It used to be just for classroom teachers. And we'll go into more of the eligibility about who can participate later. It is not just an experience where educators go and simply observe in the act of science or the process of science, but you actually become members of the team and hopefully help out with the research and learn more about science and how science is conducted. It is administered by ARCUS, the nonprofit I mentioned just a little bit ago, just to give you an idea of where and how PolarTREC fits into ARCUS's work. This is our team. As I mentioned at the beginning, I'm the PI, or Principal Investigator, for PolarTREC. That just means I get to deal with the budgets and all the fun paperwork. And I'm assisted with a great teammate, Judy Fonstock. She's the project coordinator, and these other fine people that you see. And if you were selected, you would come in more contact with our web developer, Ronnie Owens, our executive director, Helen Wiggins, and two amazing brothers, Joed and Zeb Polly, who work on various parts of the PolarTREC program as well, off and on. So the goals and objectives and the elements of our program are, so our overall goal is to invigorate polar science education and understanding by bringing educators and polar researchers together. And that's why NSF funds us. They want to get polar science out there. They want educators to use that science, and hopefully this transcends into the various publics and that people work with, whether that be students in a classroom or informal science educators have a variety of publics that they work with. And our first goal is actually really to increase the content knowledge of the person that's delivering that science. And so in this case, this would be the classroom teacher or the informal educator. And by that, this is a professional development experience. Some other things that happen because of the involvement in this professional development is that our goal is to hopefully, if you're involved in it, you become better use at delivering STEM practices to a variety of audiences, that you start to identify as an educator with science and the science community, that the people that you're delivering science to become better knowledge bearers of that science and also more engaged in polar STEM. They may not become scientists themselves, but hopefully they become informed citizens. And then the last goal we're looking at is really to develop that relationship between the educator and the research community, because it's a win-win situation and it helps convey science to beyond our little professional spheres that we all work in. So that's kind of what we're looking at and why we have this program to begin with. Some of the program components, obviously the one that everybody hears about because it's very well advertised and it's the fun part, is the actual hands-on field experience in the polar regions. The other big program components are how you deliver that experience and share it beyond your world with others. We also spend a lot of time in developing a community of practice that you can, so that if you're involved in our program, you can bounce ideas off with others, get some mentorship, and kind of share that knowledge in-house so that you become better as a practitioner of STEM education. And then we also evaluate that whole program and that whole process. And Judy will ping me if there's any any questions or anything that need to be answered as we go along, but we'll have a good Q&A at the end here. Some key program activities are, we have once you're selected to the program as an educator, not as a researcher, you would be involved in a week-long orientation, and we do a lot of technology training during that time and talk about best practices of science communication and how you'd share these things to broader audiences, and then the logistics of going to and from polar regions and what that looks like. Some other activities that are built into this whole program are a comprehensive selection process, and this is the first step of that, is letting you know that we have this comprehensive selection process, and we'll go over what that looks like. The other key feature that's unique to PolarTREC is that Judy and I do not select you. A researcher selects you into their team, and we'll go into that process in a little bit. We have lots of detailed logistics that are involved, and we work with some amazing logistics providers that are also contracted by the National Science Foundation. We also offer substitute and cover and some other, well, we offer funding, I should say, to cover substitutes and other expenses that might not be picked up by logistics providers. And we're just, and this is again for educators that apply and are selected to the program. And I'll go into that, what that means in a little bit. We involve our alumni, and we again have some funding for pre and post expedition travel for both the educator and the researcher. And then as long as we are able, we try to provide resources and support for you to continue to engage with the polar research community and share your experience. So those are some key highlights there. This is just a major look, actually not a major look, a minor look at the timeline of the major activities that we do. And you can see in, well, actually, it's not on this timeline. Anyway, September, this is, oh, I guess this is more of a timeline of after, if you were selected, what it would look like, not where we are in the timeline. Sorry about that. Anyway, you would apply to the program this fall, and if you were selected, we'd notify you sometime in December, usually. So by January of 2020, you'll know whether you are in our program or not, and who you're matched up with, and all of those fun things. We have a series of webinars that we conduct with the selected group of educators and researchers. We have an orientation that we will host, like I said earlier, and that's actually going to take place in March this year, not February like the STAR shows. And then we have a whole suite of activities centered around you getting ready to go into the field that does involve the research team, and the educator and ARCIS staff. And that's what all those little stars mean. Basically, there's a suite of activities that get you prepared for an expedition. And overlaying all of that is evaluation activities, and then and additional training that's needed. That's just to, I guess, kind of give you a time scale of how long you'd be involved in PolarTREC. And it's typically over a year and up to 16 months if you're an educator, because of product development and sharing things. And it's not an everyday thing, it's an ongoing process. Oops, sorry about that. Okay, so the research experience, which is one of those main components, the educator is matched up with the researcher, and you travel to the polar regions, the Arctic and the Antarctic. As I mentioned earlier, this experience will last typically from 3 to 6 weeks. I'd say 4 and 5 is kind of the magic number. It's an intense experience. We're hoping that you become members of the team. It does involve training and safety and communications training. And you also will be trained on how to communicate with the public on a regular basis, depending on your location. This is just a sampling of some of the places that we have sent educators. There is a star in the North Pole because we have had educators go where we are about to send our third educator to the North Pole in a week. Actually, she leaves, yeah, in 4 days on the Mosaic expedition. But we've had 2 others that have also done trans-Arctic cruises over the North Pole and have been to the North Pole. Same with the South Pole, Southern Hemisphere. We've also had educators there. So you truly can go to both ends of the earth. I've already mentioned this, that the whole concept behind our program is professional development, and educators are immersed in the experience so that you can build your scientific content knowledge and try out the latest, greatest science equipment and start communicating with researchers in a very close proximity about science and how you would want to bring that back to where you work and how you want to, what you want to do with that experience. One thing that we've added the last couple of years is the focus, for those of you that are familiar with it, with the next generation science standards. We have integrated that aspect into all of our products, and any educators are required, any educators that are selected and participate in the program when you're developing requirements, you are expected to implement and integrate NGSS into them. And that includes informal science educators as well. Outreach, we have a variety of technology tools that we've developed over the years and fine-tuned. This is just a snapshot at what some of those are, from everything from in-field presentations that are real-time, like this event is, the journaling, producing videos, photos, having relays back and forth with the public, and really whatever else you figure out that works for you, we try to support. And I mentioned this earlier. Also, we do have funding that is part of our award that helps nurture this relationship. So we do have funding for educators and researchers to get together before and after field seasons. We also have a very good social networking interface with a lot of alumni that we hope people take advantage of. We have an online learning resources database. You don't have to be a participant to use it. You can access that as much as you want. And there's some other connections both internationally and through email lists. So some of the benefits, obviously, are that you get to go practice in an amazing science experience and work side by side with researchers. That's obviously an incredible benefit if you're an educator, and probably why you're all applying. The other is that you have the opportunity to transfer that experience in real time. And I can tell you from my own experience, there's nothing like hearing a presentation from the South Pole or from some crazy place in the Arctic with the wind howling behind you. There's nothing that is more amazing than to hear, even if the satellite connection's only 5 minutes. It's great to connect with people in such remote places on this planet. We've heard that educators find it refreshing that they are seen and treated like a professional. We do our best to, you are professionals, and we expect you to act like professionals, and we will treat you like professionals as well. But that doesn't mean we won't have fun. That you are connected to an incredible network of educators and science professions. I've heard that from many, many alumni that this was just the start of opening that door, making them feel comfortable for them to start engaging not only with polar scientists, but other scientists, and going to meetings that they never would have done before, or trying and being an advocate for science in general in places and in situations that they would never have done before. So we're excited about that. Again, you're gaining science, you're trying out new tools, and it can be, for some people, a confidence builder and a professional life-changing force for them and moment. For researchers, I don't think polar researchers it's quite as transformative in the sense that they're already involved in these really amazing projects, and it's having an educator isn't that kind of, not the same impact. It's different. What it does do for a researcher is that opens them their doors to the education world and to audiences and to share their science that they might not have done before, or with new audiences that they'd like to meet, and that's exciting to them. It also does help rejuvenate why they're involved in science, and particularly polar science, and gets them excited about what they do as a career. A lot of our polar researchers that we work with are faculty at major universities, and they will often have intense conversations about how to teach particular science content, because they want to take what they've learned from you back into their teaching positions and use it in their work environments. We have some very long-lasting relationships with the scientists, and they stay friends with a lot of their educator partners, or at least that community, and it will involve them in other ways long after PolarTREC. So I'll take a breath here. The next part is all about the application process. So up until this point, I'm kind of giving you a very brief overview of what it is, why we're here, what we're trying to do. The next piece is really about the actual process of submitting an application and what that timeline looks like, what we're looking for, and so forth. And at the end, we'll cover what happens if you get selected and what happens if you don't, and answer questions, which I think is what most people have questions about. So as you can see, the application timeline starts now. It's open. And one of the pieces, or the part of that process, is that while you are all applying, we will be convening a selection committee. And the selection committee, I think I have details of that coming up. Afterwards, teachers are going to be matched with the researchers that have applied to host an educator. And then the researchers will make interview and make a final selection. I'm going to go into those details and what that looks like in a moment. We'll have our orientation in March, and then if you're selected, you go out in the field. Okay, so some basic eligibility questions, and I know that this is usually one of the big things people want to know, how they qualify or not. So you have to be a U.S. citizen or permanent resident of the United States or its possessions. Our focus is on formal or classroom teachers that teach grades 6 through 12, middle and high school. And I'm sorry if you are at grades pre-K through 5th grade. If you're a 5th grade teacher that is in one of those schools that's 5th, 6th, kind of, and they consider it part of a middle school, email Judy. And really, actually, if you have any questions about eligibility, email Judy and myself at info@polartrec.com, and we'll go over it with you. But this is kind of our basic eligibility. There's always exceptions. If you're an informal science educator, so someone that's not working in the classroom, maybe you work at a museum, a library, run an after-school STEM program. Maybe you work at some kind of nature conservancy or whatever. There's a whole lot of different kinds of informal STEM, so our science education. So if you're one of those people, there's a lot of room. Our request, though, is that your focus in that job or in that capacity is some kind of connection back to middle and high school students or the educators and staff that work with that group. Doesn't have to be exclusive. We're just hoping that you have some connection back to that classroom and that age group, because our focus is really that middle and high school age range. And that is our request by our funder for all of this. Any discipline or subject matter is accepted. We've had librarians, artists, music teachers, so I should say art teachers, not artists. There's a different program for that. So you can be a history teacher, English teacher, site administrator, maybe. That's one of those ones, as long as you can kind of tie it all back together. Anyway, that's what we're looking for. Again, if you have questions about whether you are eligible or not, please email us. Researcher eligibility. This is funded by the National Science Foundation. If you're a researcher, you know the game. So we would like you to be primarily funded and or collaborating with an NSF funded project. If it's not the case, just let us know and we'll talk to you more about how to work that out. You don't have to be a US citizen to apply to the program. However, again, NSF is the final decision maker on all of this. And we do look at research projects that might be sometimes classified as subpolar. Just email us. It's the easiest way to figure out what your research is and whether it would fit the needs of what we're looking for from our funders. Okay. So related to all of this is how we go through that timeline or that process. So October 7th at 5 p.m. Alaska time, we will be closing the online web form for educator applications. We will expect at that time over 200 applications. The process is that Judy and Janet go through them, and maybe one other person, will go through those applications and take a real quick, we review them all, and then we eliminate some of them based on usually incomplete answers, not eligibility, not eligible, and things like that. Then those applications will go to be sent out to our selection committee, which is usually about, depending on the number of applicants we receive, but 15 to 18 people. And those people are usually educators that have been through the program themselves, researchers that have hosted educators, and sometimes we get logistics providers, but that's typically we get their alumni that review the applications. The selection committee takes a subset of those applications. We divide them up into groups and try to balance a variety of things: location, researcher, educator, informal educator, so forth. And they take a subset of those applications and they have a rubric that they go through, and they read every application and then they score it. This all takes place in October, and by early November, they will have had scored all the applications. They will have talked as groups within their groups about the scores. They will discuss each applicant that they have in their pile, and they will decide whether that person advances to a final pool of applicants or not. At the end of that process, which usually happens in, like I said, late October, early November, we'll have what we call our top final pool of applicants, and usually about 40 of the applications. So you can see it gets pretty competitive here. We go from 200 down to 40. We have 12 slots that we can match this year. That means we have 12 positions, 6 in the Arctic and 6 in the Antarctic. Sometimes that goes back and forth a little bit. So anyway, just to kind of give you, we go from 200 to 40 to 12. In early November, all the applicants that applied will be notified of whether where you are in that whole application application process. And then in November, what happens next is we send the researchers that applied to the program, and we've been communicating back and forth with them through email about their project and fine-tuning that, and they'll know who they are, whether they're going to get an educator or not by November. And we tell them, here's another subset of applications based on what you as an educator that applied to the program have said your science interests are, your location interest, and your timing interests. And we say here's 6 to 8 applicants that meet your criteria that the researcher has identified in their application. And we say, please select your top 3 for an in-person interview or a virtual in-person interview. And we will notify you if you're part of that group and a researcher wants to interview you. And then we set up the time frame, and it will be a webinar. It will be a Zoom communication, just like today, except for we will actually all have our videos on. And then we have interview questions, and you get interviewed by the research team, and Judy and I sit in on those interviews. And we also will communicate before the interview with you if you've made it that far, what to expect. We will also relay any information about the research project, what the researcher's doing, see if we're even interested in interviewing with them, and so forth. That all happens in this November to December timeframe, and we do realize there's holidays, and researchers are also doing field work if they're in Antarctica and things like that, but we work around all of that. Our goal is that by the first of the year, we have everybody matched up as best we can, and then we move forward, and we'll notify everybody by the first of the year, you know, the final selection and so forth. And again, our orientation is in 2020 in March with the location to be determined. And okay, so how do you do all this? Well, the first step is to fill out our online application. There are 2 separate web forms. One's for the educator applying to the program, and one's for the researcher that wishes to host an educator. They're both online forms. They both have similar kinds of things here that are important to all of you. It's combination short answer and essay questions. For the educator and even for the researcher, it may require you to do some research and preparation. You need to have an email address to complete the application. Your answers may not save if you navigate away from the page or close the page. And so because that's an issue, because especially the educator one's particularly long, we have given everybody on the application page access to download a Word document that has all the questions, so you can actually fill that out. And then we highly, highly, highly recommend that you cut and paste. And this is the same for researchers. I'd have you, because we ask a lot about logistics in the researcher one, cut and paste and into the online application. There is a pre-existing supplement that I'll go into what that is in a moment, that if you are in this area, you would want to do that at the same time as the online application. If you have any troubles, email us as soon as possible. Just a reminder, educator apps are due Monday, October 7th. And then at 5 p.m. Alaska time. And researcher apps, I didn't think I mentioned this before, it's a little more flexible on their end on submitting things, and those aren't due until October 14th. And if you have troubles with that as a researcher, you can contact us as well. Some application tips. Spell check and proofread. I mean, think of what you want from your students or anyone applying to a job at your organization or something. This is exactly it. This is not magic. This is basic professionalism. Spell check, proofread, write thorough, concise answers. If we have word limits, there's a reason we have word limits. Follow them, count those words. Be clear, professional about your goals. articulate why you want this experience. How is it that you're going to use this? Yeah, we get it that it's really exciting to go to the Antarctic, and it's might be on everyone's bucket list, but why is this important to your professional development? How is it that this is really going to enhance this? This is like taking, you know, we spend a lot of money towards professional development here. So how are you going to use our money wisely? And how are you going to, you know, really convey science to a variety of audiences? So if you have good examples about that, share them with them. Read the questions thoroughly, address all the parts, do your homework, etc. And the big thing is make sure your emails also from us are coming into your inbox. Sometimes it'll be info@polartrec.com. Sometimes that's the usual. Or it might be individually from Janet at Warburton at arcus.org or Judy at arcus.org. Anyway, if you don't see something, just send us a note so that we can say, hey, yeah, it looks like it might have gone to your spam box or something. Some things that you don't want to do, because this will put you in that first pile right away, is misspell PolarTREC, Arctic, and Antarctic. And it sounds trivial, but what it says to us is that you haven't been reading the details and you haven't spell checked. So that you don't know the program you're applying to. Just writing I, me, in the sense that it's really about you and not about the publics you work for, or maybe the organization or something like that, that it's really is you just wanting to go on a trip to the Arctic or the Antarctic. That will get you in that pile pretty quick. Yeah, just again, not thoroughness, paraphrasing essay questions. If you have applied previously, I strongly encourage you to, you can use some of your answers, but I tweak those answers and add something fresh and new, or maybe take a different perspective if you haven't been selected. I know it's a very competitive program, and if you aren't really sure about why you haven't been selected in the past, you can email us, but the truth is that sometimes it's just a matter of timing, and you know, the selection committee just didn't see something. So I think just if you've applied in the past and you haven't been selected in particular, now think about what you're stating in your response, and maybe try a different approach or a fresh answer. Just don't cut and paste from last year's application, because that does get noticed. Also, vague or brief answers. I mean, some places there's certainly the case for that. Like, it's like, what's your health? Yeah, I'm great shape. It's good. I work out every day. That could be fine. However, if we say, how are you going to implement this in your classroom? You know, that should be a little more thorough and use up to the 200 count limit. Incomplete answers. The other thing is, please do not include any attachments or supplemental documentation, because one, the system won't accept it, and we also don't want it in our email because it's not fair to everybody else. We just want the same application for everybody. If you have corrections or changes up until the deadline, we encourage you, if it's significant, like you read your application and you're like, oh, that's not what I meant to say, or I completely didn't cut this part of the paragraph or something and didn't copy and paste. Redo that application. I know that sounds burdensome, but if you had the Word document, it shouldn't be too bad to cut and paste back in. And the way the system is, we take the last one that you submitted. So for sure, make sure the last application that you've submitted to us is your complete application. All the rest will get dumped. If it's minor, email us that correction and we'll fix it for you, like the email address or the URL didn't get, or your contact, the phone number changed or something like that. Email us and we'll correct those minor changes. Okay, looking to see how we're doing. Okay, if you were selected, this is what happens, or what you're provided. So You'll get training for the experience, both virtually and in person. We already talked about that. You'll come to a 1-week orientation. We do have limited travel support for pre and post field meetings between you and the research team, or between the educator and the research team. We do provide equipment, cameras, laptop, and accessories related to those for the duration of your participation. You will get outdoor gear issued to you that you need, in the sense like if you're going to Antarctica, they have a whole suite of gear that's required. You don't have to purchase any of that. That gets, if you're an educator, that gets checked out to you. If you're an educator going to the Arctic, similar, we talk about gear, and you could get outerwear issued to you. Again, this is for educators, not for researchers. Educators that get selected, if you're a classroom teacher and your expedition is during the school year, we will reimburse your school for a substitute. We don't reimburse individuals, we reimburse schools. And if you have any medical or dental expenses that relate to you getting medically or dentally physically qualified to go out on an expedition, whether that be in the Arctic or the Antarctic, and there are some cases of that, we also reimburse you those expenses that weren't covered by insurance. And we pay for all the travel to and from the orientation, as well as getting you to and from your expedition and out on the expedition. And how and who covers those all depend on which the situation is, but in general, those are all covered. Our goal is to reduce out-of-pocket expenses for the educator that gets selected for the experience. For researchers, what happens is we will work with you and the NSF logistics providers to cover all the travel to and from the field, meals, outdoor gear for your educator. So the idea there is that if you're a researcher applying to the program, your research grant, unless we've talked about it in other scenarios or situations, will not cover those. It won't be taken away from your research grant. ARCAS provides support for the educators when NSF doesn't. And I just mentioned that those instances like substitute and extra medical expenses. And we also provide them all the training and tools needed to communicate science from the field. And one thing a researcher might incur that we can't cover is if you decide to come to the orientation, which would be awesome. We can't cover that. We do actually have travel to meet your educator. So that one's not quite true, but there might be some pre-field costs or materials and things like that that you want to share with them that we wouldn't cover necessarily, like copying or a textbook or sending journal articles or something like that. That might be covered under your own budgets. Some costs that educators might incur, it just depends on the situation. Our personal apparel and gear not provided, such as underwear, long underwear, socks, toiletries, some gloves, depending, and some kind of layering sometimes. Sometimes we put some medical insurance and evacuation insurance are not covered, but that's not true. We cover that now. So bullet number 2 is irrelevant. If there's personal travel that is adjacent to the expedition, or when you do outreach activities, so maybe you decide to stay in New Zealand longer for a trip after your expedition to Antarctica, that would all be on you to pay for. We wouldn't cover that. And we do not cover salary costs. Actually, we never covered that. So we never cover anybody's salary. And if you're an informal educator, we can't, I'm sorry, give you stipends or cover time away from your job. So you have to definitely talk to your office about that. And again, oh, I say that right there, you don't receive a stipend for participation in the program. So those things we don't cover. So what are your time commitments for an educator? Just this is kind of rehashing some of these things, but basically I mentioned at the very beginning, it's about a year-long commitment for sure, sometimes up to 16, 18 months, depending on the kind of products and whatever else you want to do afterwards. But you are definitely have to come to our orientation. It's a requirement. It's 1 week. We pay for everything. It's going to be in March 2020, and I believe right now the dates are set for, I don't know, maybe Judy can type it in chat while I'm doing that, but the tentative dates I think are March 15th through the 20th. And they will, the location is yet to be determined. You will also have to be committed to doing some webinars related to training. We have pre-field virtual meetings like this where we go over logistics. You're required to do those both before and after the field season. You have, of course, your field season while you're out in the field that you're committed to. On your own, you have to take some time to practice and learn techniques related to the program. You have to take some time to develop products and share those, get up to speed on the science that you might be participating in, and then, of course, participate in and develop any products or evaluation components. I participate in evaluation aspects of the program. For a researcher, it's not as intense as the educator, as you can imagine, but we see your commitment at the very beginning of this process, that after you apply and you are, we reach out for you to select an educator. You take part in that process of reviewing applications that you're interested in, interviewing, and selecting your educator. And that can be a fairly intensive time. It's about 9 hours plus actually interviewing them. We also have a few webinars that are related to the program and program requirements that we ask you to participate in. We also do these pre and post field logistics calls, which are virtual, so you participate in those. Of course, you're committed to working with the educator in the field and helping them get comfortable with the science and the material beforehand. And sometimes there's even a pre-field visit between the two of you, so you get to know one another, or you and the team. And then there's outreach activities that you may both want to do or participate in, such as going to a conference or maybe post, some kind of post outreach activity to a classroom and things like that. And then we have evaluation. But usually all of those activities are spread out through a year, and usually within 1 year you're done with your commitment to at least us. Hopefully the relationship goes beyond that. Okay, my last segment, and then we'll have time for questions here. I can't see you, but I imagine you're all sleeping by now. Anyway, I didn't get picked, now what? That's always a question. Well, our first thing is apply again. And I know there's some people out there, I heard of some already that have applied like 5 times. I don't think that's actually a record. I think I've had some that have applied for quite a long time, but apply again. Ask us if we have a reason why you didn't get selected. We can't review everybody's applications, provide feedback, but sometimes we might get feedback from the selection committee, and we can respond to that if we have the information. Another key thing is, and this will help your application in the future if you didn't get picked, is start following and using follow expeditions, use resources, start to build your own polar community. Going out in the field is really awesome and it's really unique, but there's a lot of ways to connect with the polar research community that don't require you going out in the field. And with the alumni network, they're fantastic educators. So take advantage of those people, the resources that they've developed, and start sharing this information with the audiences. Yes, it's really awesome to go out in the field, but there's a lot of material there. We all learn from a variety of ways, and I encourage you to share it and use it with those people that you work with and our network with. Participate in a live event. That's always fun. Contribute to our learning resources. We've got some great Polar material that we could use, or access to websites and things that we don't know about. Please let us know about that. Also, you can sign up for the email list, and you can actually use the email list to reach out to other educators. So if you have something that's worth sharing, please let us know about that. Start engaging with the networks that are existing beyond PolarTREC. There's the Association of Polar Early Career Scientists. These are scientists from around the world that are starting their careers, and they're actively engaged in communicating science. Fantastic group of researchers. Get to know them. There's also Polar Educators International, another international group of like-minded people that are passionate about the polar regions and are trying to get people to understand it, and another way to connect, if you whether you're in PolarTREC or not. And then start participating in our online community about polar science education, and engaging people in these conversations. Okay, I'm gonna go to, let's see, I gotta see if I can see the chat here.
No questions yet, Janet.
Okay, so yeah, and for those of you that might have to leave and things like that, I'm going to try to wrap up in 10 minutes. So with these questions here, but again, this will be archived, and you can always email us. All right, so Judy, I'll just have you interrupt if there are questions or people want to ask their own. But these are questions that came through through the webinar form, and we'll try to answer all of them. So this is with regards to applications. How many people are accepted? 12. We have 12 slots, 6 in the Arctic, 6 in the Antarctic per year. Does it matter where you came from, with the United States or Puerto Rico? Absolutely not. Our forms on how to fill that out, like where your location, might be cumbersome if you're from U.S. possessions or territories outside the United States, but do your best as you can. But if you are from a U.S. citizen or any of the possessions or territories, you are welcome to apply. Are there age restrictions for participants? An adult. So yes, in the sense you should be 21. Actually, you could probably be 18. 18 would probably be the youngest. But upwards from that, no. And the only reason why I say adult is because a lot of the bases, or a lot of the research field stations are on military bases, and they want you to be at least 18, if not 21. Let's see. What types of backgrounds are you looking for? I'm not really sure what that means, but it's wide open. So just apply, and I guess we'll see what the selection committee thinks about that. Just explain your background. How many areas of interest need to be high in order to create a competitive application? So there's a space on the application where you are picking your areas of interest. This is not about how many you're so interested in. This is just, we need this information so we can correctly match you with a good, with the right kind of research project. So if you aren't interested in astrophysics, do not make that highly interesting. It's not a competitive process for that. It's more about the matching. So make sure you gauge that right, I guess. Are there any specific fields in which you would like the teachers to have general specific knowledge of? Nope, it's wide open. And Judy, interrupt me if there's anything you want to add here. Are there, whoops, I went too fast. Are there any specific fields in which you would like the teachers to have general specific knowledge of? Oh, I answered that one. No, it's wide open. Are there any skills that would be advantageous to being considered as a candidate? There's a whole section about skills, and it actually has some examples of what kind of skills, but no, in general, it's wide open. We're looking for somebody that just will use this experience and wisely. And if there's any special skills that you needed for the research experience, we talk with you about how to get that training if it's needed. But at the moment for this application, don't worry about that. Do your teachers generally have any research experience? That's a good question. So there are some people that have had these types of experiences in the past where they might have been at NOAA Teachers at Sea, for instance, JOIDUS Resolute, or maybe a research experience at a local lab. If you've had these kind of experiences, there's a section that asks that question. Answer yes, and then say how this one would build off of that experience and be very clear. You do not have to have had a research experience to apply to this program. In fact, it's actually preferred that, well, I should just say it's not preferred. I mean, this is open to anybody, but if you've never been out in the field or had a research experience with a lab or worked with a scientist, that is totally fine. That's what this program's all about, to give you that experience. Are applicants given specific feedback if they're not successful in their application? We will try. You can email us and we'll give you back feedback if we have it. As an informal educator, one that teaches STEM to students on Saturdays during the school year, would you be eligible to apply? Yes. What makes a successful application? What are some of the reasons that applicants might not be chosen? I just went over those in the prior slide.
Janet, I've got 2 questions that have come in that will fit into this section. One is, if you have experience working with a researcher, should I include this in the application? Or are you looking for educators who have never worked with a researcher?
If you've had experience working with a researcher, that's what I was just mentioning, or a research experience, yes, please mention it. There is a section for that, and tell us how you build off of that experience and or how this would be different type of experience. Just explain yourself. We are not only looking for educators who have never worked for research. We are looking for a variety of educators that have a variety of experiences. And the short answer is we're looking for educators that will use the experience, can use the experience, and can use it wisely. Okay.
And the second question is, if I apply and get accepted to the program and then I change schools, would that affect my standing in the position?
No. If you switch jobs or you switch schools, it does not impact your application. We'll discuss if you're selected and you get all the way through the process and you're matched up with a researcher, we'll just talk about how that's going to work now with your current position, etc. Okay. Expeditions. Are there participation opportunities for geology and earth science? This is a good question. The researchers that apply to host an educator come from all different types of science disciplines. So theoretically, yes, there would be some geology and earth sciences, but there's also going to probably be some physical, oceanography, marine biology, whatever. We never know what kinds of research the researchers are doing until they apply to the program. And that's why the questions about what your interests are, what kinds of things you're teaching, plate and where you want to go are important for that matching so that we can match. So you aren't applying to a specific research project. You're applying to be matched with a researcher, and we'll take those questions and do our best to match you up with the appropriate person. Typically, however, we have a lot of physical science applications because that's what's happening in the polar regions. Are there opportunities to take or analyze course sample sets or do your own research? I will just take the latter part of that question, do your own research, because again, the first part, it would just depend on who you got matched with and if they were a scientist that did coring. Yes, you might be able to, but really the idea is, can you do your own research? You'd have to discuss that with the researcher once you got selected and what the opportunities, it depends on the location, the nature of the science, and what kind of, and the timing of the whole thing. So that's something that could be discussed. And there have been students that have also sent their own kinds of questions and research projects with the educator into the field to have done. So it's not impossible. What type of research might we be doing? Do you get to pick the research project, or are you assigned to one based on skills and interests? So similar to the first question, it's a variety of science disciplines. We don't know until we get the researcher applications, and it is the latter. You are assigned to a researcher. Your application, I will say, you aren't assigned. Your application will go to a researcher or a set of several researchers, conceivably, depending on your interests, and they will decide whether they want to interview you or not. And then eventually it will be the researcher that picks you. That being said, we inform you all along the way once you are in that top final pool, and which researchers what research projects, what researchers want to interview you and what their projects are, and we will tell you that, and you can decide whether you want to be interviewed or not, or if that research is of interest or not. What are the dates? So expeditions are all over the place. So the Arctic ones typically start in April. They'll start in April of 2020, and they can go till late September of 20 or even October of 2020. And they're 4 to 6 weeks, somewhere in between all of that. We don't know until we actually have the research project what the dates are. If you're going to Antarctica, again, you can be deployed as early as October or as late as January 2021. Are there opportunities for polar scuba diving as part of the research? Well, that's a special case. Sometimes, yes. It would depend on the match in the research project. So possibly, we'll just leave it at that. What percentage of the teachers who get selected have already set up a relationship with the research? How important is the prior relationship? You do not need to have a set up a relationship prior to applying or with any particular researcher. If you do have that prior relationship and you want to go out with that particular researcher and no other researcher, then email us and we'll guide you through that pre-existing supplemental documentation that was just minorly referenced earlier on in this presentation. But you do not have to have a prior relationship with a researcher, and you do not have to go out in the field with a particular researcher, but it is possible to do that. And if that is something that you and the researcher want to do, just text us. I guess it's only important if that's what you want to do and you want to be with just that one researcher. Otherwise, don't worry about it. What we'll be doing, what will we be doing that is STEM oriented? Astronomy, neutrinos, climate change, all of it. They're all STEM oriented. All this polar science projects involve some aspect of STEM. And if it's not your immediate PI that's doing a STEM activity, it will be somebody on the team, I can guarantee it. So it's all interdisciplinary for the most part, science, and they're all STEM oriented. Is there an index or director of researchers who have projects with PolarTREC, and is that encouraged to contact them directly? No, there is not a directory, and no, don't contact them directly, just apply and we'll take it from there. Requirements, what are the expectations of the teachers with regard to your program? There's a lot of requirements, and if you're selected, we go over the details of those, but in the end, you will be asked to produce some products. If you're a classroom teacher, those will be lesson plans. If you're an informal educator, it'll be some sort of product that will fit into wherever you're working, and we have to go over that with you because it's different for every informal educator. It could be a video, it could be a contribution to a curriculum unit, it could be a teacher training, something like that. Anyway, the expectation is that you not only start the program, that you finish the program. And is there another question, Judy? I see my chat bouncing around.
Well, there was one back for expeditions. There was a question, is NASA's OIB or OMG one of the research partners?
Not this year. So at the moment, I should just state that the NASA Operation Icebridge and some of their other programming, there's some other NASA programs like NASA Above and things like that. At the moment, have not contacted us about having educators. There might be a future NASA project, but at the moment, I would say the answer is no, but that could change in the next month. We won't know until we have heard from the research community.
Okay.
Okay. What are the expectations of teacher? Let's see, I answered that one. Are social sciences, world history teachers eligible? If yes, so the first part is yes, they are eligible. And if yes, any tips for teachers applying from this discipline? I think it is tricky if you're a teacher that's not science oriented. If you, one, don't have a lot of science content in your background, and two, if you're not teaching a science class. And same with informal educators. So the trick here is, and the tip is, it's not really a trick, the tip here is to really demonstrate in your answers to us how you see this fitting into what you are teaching or what you are working on. So we have had some very successful, like I've mentioned before, librarians, history teachers, English teachers, and even some physical education teachers apply to the program. They just did a really nice job of articulating how they would use this experience and how it would impact their students. Why, as a professional, did they need this? Why was it important to them, and how can it make them better at their own teaching? So it's really about how you say that. So that's the tip, is demonstrate it and tell us why this is important to you as a social studies teacher and how it would impact your students in this case in the classroom. How would you put this into your curriculum that you are teaching? How does this help you? How specific do our plans for implementation have to be before the trip? As an informal educator, our programs change often and opportunities may change between application time and implementation time. Excellent question. This would be the same for classroom teachers as well. That you do not have to have specific plans. In the application, we are looking for you to brainstorm. We want to hear your grand ideas. If you had this experience, what is it that you would do with it? And the realities may not be that you could do all that, or something may change in your workflow. So your plans don't have to be specific, but we want to hear those grand ideas. I would do this. I would reach out to these people because of X, Y, and Z, or I would, have a movie night every night, or whatever it is. Yeah, so you don't have to have specific plans in place. We're looking for big ideas and creative ideas of how you would implement this. Are there deliverables that participants are expected to produce or other requirements following the experience? Yes. And we go into those details once you're selected. We don't want you in this application to get bogged down with what our program requirements are. We don't want your application to be saying, I'm going to do this as a program requirement. Well, again, what we're looking for is creativity and reaching out kind of out to groups of people you might already have good connections with, or people that you might not have connections but have always wanted to build those relationships and could benefit from you being out in this field. Again, these are all questions so far that I see related to educators. So if there's a researcher out there and you have a question, please post it. Although I suspect most of the people on this call are educators. Other questions, besides having the support from the school administration, if this is to take place during the school year, would I be responsible for covering the cost of substitute during my absence? As I mentioned originally, no, we would reimburse the school for the sub during your absence. The first part of that question is very important. I want to re-articulate it. I want to re-emphasize it, I guess is a better term. That it is important if you're applying to this program that you let your administration know, if you're a classroom teacher, that you are applying and why you're applying and what it means. Like you could get selected to go out on expedition for 6 weeks during the school year. Make sure that they start to see what that looks like and understand it, and that you have their permission. And support, mostly. Same if you are an informal educator, that your administration, your organization is behind you and knows what that means. And if you have questions about that, please email us. If accepted to the PolarTREC program, are there opportunities to be in contact with the researchers and team members after the expedition to share their experiences with their students? Yes, 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 and we support it 120%. Does the PolarTREC program count towards any continuing education credits? It can. We have to work with you individually to set that up. Do the educators participating in PolarTREC during the 2020 field season ever meet one another to discuss their experience, curriculum materials, etc.? The sad part about that is that, yes, you will meet during the orientation. Afterwards, it's hit or miss. We don't have any same group get-togethers, but often we do virtual ones, but not in-person ones. But yes, we do it. What is the timeline once accepted into the program? I think the bigger timeline is that applications will take a while to review, and it will take a while for us to finalize the selections. We hope to let everybody know about their status by January 2020. After that, things start happening pretty quick because the orientation will be in March 2020, and so we'll be in contact with you soon after that, January 2020, to move and start working on travel and get the final participants, selected participants, up and ready. And that's both researchers and educators. And how do I access the archive of this webinar? It will be sent out to everybody that registered, as well as a link under the About section, Informational Webinar tab on the website. Whew. Did I do it?
I've got just a few more questions for you.
Okay.
Edie's got some really good questions. Let's see, if we're accepted and it's during the school year, are we able to Skype our students?
Yeah, it depends on the location of the research expedition. Yes, you will be able, it might not be Skype, but you will be able to have some communications with your students virtually, most likely from most locations.
Okay, 2 more questions. If we are not accepted, is there a Skype a Scientist program available to get researchers into our classrooms digitally?
That's a great question. We don't have a formal way of doing that. Certainly if there's an educator out in the field and you're back in your classroom, you could sign up to do our Polar Connect events, which are real-time webinars like this Zoom. It actually uses Zoom, not Skype. And then sometimes in places like Antarctica, some of the educators that are with researchers down there will do that Skype to classroom frequently while they're down there. Yeah, only otherwise, if that is something you're interested, we do have, there's a couple of things you could do on the social networking sites on the Facebook page, as well as Twitter and with the Apex group, and just ask for that. As an educator, you could say, hey, I'd like to Skype with this kind of researcher at this time of year, time of day, and I'm sure that would happen. Is there, I see the grad credit option. I don't know about grad credit. Again, we'd have to work on that one. It's the same with the continuing education credits. That's something we'd have to work out individually with you.
Okay, that's it.
Okay. Ooh, sorry, everybody. That's a lot of talking on my end. I know it was a lot of information. But good luck with your applications, and reach out to Judy and myself at info@polartrec.com, and we'll be happy to, you know, go over your very specific questions with you through email. But really good luck, and pay attention to the deadlines. That form closes at 5 p.m. Alaska Daylight Time. So, and find your favorite researcher and send them our way. Thanks, everybody.